Hey everybody, this is Tim Smith. I am a community engineer at Chef, and today I'm going to go over a whole bunch of stuff that I've been working on for a while. It's been a really long time since we've had a demo, and I want to talk about some of the major releases of cookbooks and tooling that we've released, and some of the fun stuff that I think people might not have noticed. The first one I'm going to talk about is Foodcritic. Foodcritic, if you're not aware, is our linting tool for chef cookbooks. We have 102 rules now, which is a huge increase in what we've seen previously, and we're really trying to focus on using Foodcritic to help people deal with chef migrations at this point. So we're putting a ton of work into Foodcritic, making sure that every time we add a deprecation to Chef, or there's some code that we'd like to remove sometime down the road, that we get it into Foodcritic so that we make sure people can go through their code in their CI systems in Travis or Jenkins or whatever, and they can make sure that they clean that code up well before they ever want to actually do the migration. So this last 2 months, I guess it's been, since we've done a demo here, I think I've made like 4 or 5 different Foodcritic releases. I'm not sure exactly how far to go back here, but I'm going to talk about maybe kind of like this block right here of rules that we've added. I think we've added more than that. If you get the latest Chef DK version 2.4, that has the brand new Foodcritic. We're going to be enabling this in the supermarket, so you'll see cookbook quality metrics that are using these rules as well. You can decide what you bring into your environment based on the quality metrics that you see with these new rules. But I'm going to pull up a fake cookbook that I made. It's my favorite way to test these things, and I'm going to show off some of the new rules that we have. There's a whole bunch of stuff, so I'll just go over a few different things that I'm doing here that are wrong. This is a simple cookbook. It's got a recipe and a resource. Those are really the only things that matter here. The first one is this package resource. We've got 2 things in this package resource that we shouldn't be doing anymore. The first is that we're actually calling the provider for package. And this is something that we used to do in the past. You see it kind of cargo culted around and floating around. Instead of directly calling something like RPM package or apt package or dpackage or whatever we want, somebody would call package, and then they'd change the provider under the hood. The problem is the package resource is a really complex resource. It's a combination of a base package resource and then the actual platform or package system specific resource. And if you try to use the package resource in Chef auto detects that say you should be using, I don't know, apt, when you want to use RPM, if you override that to RPM by just changing the provider, you're really going to break things. It's something you don't want to do. If you know for a fact that you need it to be an RPM package, instead of saying package, you just want to say RPM package up here, and that will get you exactly what you want, and it will do it the right way. You're not kind of like slipping things through mid chef run, sort of tricking the provider. So we don't want people to be doing this anymore, and we have a rule for it now. So you should not do this. The second one that I haven't seen a ton of recently is Epic Fail. Epic Fail goes way back to the very first releases of Chef. This is not a call that I really see that much of. I looked through every cookbook on the supermarket. This is actually just an alias to ignore failure. So don't do that. Use ignore failure. So that's the package one. Here in Launch D, this is a Chef 13 deprecation. We used to have in Launch D a property called hash. Calling a property the same thing as a type in Ruby turned out was a really bad idea. So we had to rename that. It's plist hash now. It is a hash, but it's really the plist hash. So we renamed that. If you're migrating to Chef 13, you'd have to update that. I checked the supermarket. I didn't find any uses of it, but I think this is more a resource you see internally for people managing Mac laptops or servers or whatnot. Then we have another one that's, again, another deprecation warning. This is a Chef 14 deprecation warning. URL call is an old resource that we had. We're removing it. I don't think it was something that anyone was using. We used it a little bit internally in Chef. It was for basically running Erlang code within your Chef run. Very strange use case. Not entirely sure if it fully works. We're removing it. Again, I didn't find any uses of this anywhere on the supermarket, so I don't think that that's going to impact anybody. Then we'll flip over this custom resource I wrote. There's quite a few different ones in here. Again, they're all pretty small and simple things to update. The first one is this property I'm setting here. We have a name property, which is a special kind of property in Chef. But we have a name property named name. And why that's a little odd is that this exact block here already ships to you as part of the custom resource. If I took this out, the code is exactly the same. There's no real reason to actually define this again. And I think people weren't entirely realizing what this did. So the real point of name property is this. If I wanted to say like package name, now I have a property called package name, and I could create a resource, and this is my something resource. So if I had like a test something, before I would have to say like Bob, and this would be my package. My package would be Bob, right? And in the cookbook code, I would say new resource.bob, and that would access the name property. This is the name property. It's the name of the resource. But what if I wanted to say like install that thing I really need? I wanted to give kind of a friendly resource name, right? But I still want to install Bob. Well, what I can do here, because I've created this package name property, is I can do this, and this is Bob. Now, in my code, if I wrote when I went to actually go do that package install, if I wrote my code as new resource underscore name, we're talking about this. But now that I've made package name a name property, if I access new resource.package name, I get Bob if I do this, and if I don't do this, I automatically get the resource name. So that's the value of name property, name attribute if it's an LWRP. I don't think a lot of people understood what they were actually doing here. It really just allows you to kind of have friendly resource names that people can optionally use. If they want to optionally call the package name something different, that's fine. The other cool thing it allows you to do is normally you couldn't do like test something Bob and then like later on test something Bob. These two resources are named the same thing. I can actually name them different things here. I could have this be like, now these are unique resources, even though they're actually doing the same thing. Now, in this example, that's not something you'd ever want to do, but there's tons of times that you do actually want to do that. So this allows you to do it. I just want to make sure that people are using it correctly. I'm probably actually going to have more of a demo later on why you would do that, because again, I don't think people understand it properly, but there's no need to have this code. So that is my super long explanation of the name property. In this action, I have a few different resources here that are all going to alert. The first one is RubyBlock. RubyBlock has this action of create. Create for a RubyBlock didn't really make sense. We made it as an alias. I'm not sure if it's the greatest readability thing. The underlying action is actually run. Now, run for Ruby code makes sense. Create for Ruby code does not. They're just aliases, but we want everybody to get on the same thing so when they read the code, they understand what it's actually doing. So we're going to alert here if you use create. The next one is deploy resource. This is a really old resource. It's kind of a Capistrano-ish thing. It's really useful when it's useful, and most of the time it's totally not. It is just a super problematic resource that never should have been included in Chef. So we're taking it out in Chef 14. We think that's going to give a much better new user experience. We're going to move it to a cookbook. So if there's people that want to use it, we'll have a cookbook for you. You can rely on that cookbook. You'll be able to use it the same way here. Just somewhere in your run list, you'll have to depend on this new deploy cookbook. I'm not entirely sure what we're going to call it. Probably chef_deploy. But you'll see that coming out soon. I would generally recommend anybody who's never used the deploy resource to never use it, because you're going to find that it's pretty painful to use. Next one is the chocolatey package. This is another one where the action was just wrong. When we moved chocolatey package from the chocolatey cookbook, the action was uninstall. In order to align it with all of our other packages, the action here should be remove. So we're going to alert now if you're using the existing naming. It's just not necessary, and it's going to be a little confusing as you read through because it's not consistent. Then we have this pile of includes. Now, these are really, really rarely used includes. It's a whole bunch of old things. Some of these go back to like Chef 10, definitely Chef 11. None of these are new. I searched the supermarket. There was very few uses of any of these, and a lot of it was if statements where they did the right thing or the wrong thing, depending on if they were on like Chef 10 or something. So I don't think these really impact anybody, but basically some of these mix-ins have been renamed, and some of them have been split out into multiple mix-ins. None of these includes are things that you should be doing anymore. And if you weren't writing really complex like HWRPs and stuff like that, or funky library code, you would never see these. They're all going to get deprecated in Chef 14. You'll have to use the correct ones. So now we have this alert, and that's the big bulk here. Those are all these wonderful mix-in ones up here. So let's actually go watch that failure there. That's awesome. Let's go into my test cookbook here, and I'm going to fire up Foodcritic. And I'll just show you, like, voila, a whole bunch of things alerted, right? So I think this is going to be really great for people. Obviously, you're going to see more failures in your cookbooks, which I know sometimes gets people a little agitated. But I think we're going to get a lot more consistent code, a lot more readable code, making sure we have the actions that people expect, and then cleaning up a lot of deprecated things, again, before you get to that code, right? This is before Chef 14 ships. You can start preparing your code for Chef 14. Even if you're still on 12, you can rename these things. You can get them all in line. You can stop using these mix-ins if you are for some reason. So that's Foodcritic, and that one took a while. Close that out. The next one I'm going to talk about is dokken-images. Dokken-images is what kitchen-dokken uses by default. This is Sean O'Mara's project. It's basically taking the base containers that all these distros ship us and expanding them out. So here's an example. Here's CentOS 6. We start with the CentOS 6 official Docker image, and then we install a whole bunch of stuff, right? And these are all the things that you need: Witch, Strace, Proc, all that fun stuff that you need for Chef to work, for Ojai to work, for Inspect to work. So you get kind of a fat container. They're pretty big. They're like 400 or 500 megs sometimes, but they have everything you need on them, which is super important. I added a bunch of stuff to these recently that I think is going to make them work a lot better. It's going to have people have a lot fewer issues with kitchen-dokken. One of the first ones in here, if I can find it, is... Maybe it wasn't in this one. Several of these were missing password, which is a really important package to have. So I just added it here to Amazon Linux, right? So this is just a simple little one package addition. Without password, if you're on one of these Red Hat-based distros, you can't do anything with the user or the group resource because it requires you to have the password tool in order to get information, right? Chef can't work with that. We also switched over from the full Vim to Vim minimal. This saves us like 6 packages and knocks like 30 megs off our image size. So if you're trying to pull these things down to CI system, knocking 30 megs off the image size is always really great. That speeds it up by a little bit. Cleaned up a few different things. Got the Amazon Linux image working, which is a really key one. This has been a problematic image in the past. We used to do some weird things with the network. Turned out none of it actually worked. Got it back to the point where you can install packages. Yay! And that means that you can actually use this for testing. So if you're writing community cookbooks, you want to support Amazon Linux, it is a little bit different than Red Hat. It's got different packages and stuff like that. You can start testing it now with this Amazon Linux one. And soon we'll have this Fedora 27 and Ubuntu 17.10 actually building. These get built continuously, so you're constantly pulling in the latest from here, the latest Ubuntu Upstart 14.04. Unfortunately, we're not in a Habitat kind of world, so we're not building based on a trigger because of a security vulnerability. We just have to build continuously and hope that we get them. One reason why Habitat's a lot cooler. So that's dokken-images. I think that's going to be super important for a lot of people who are trying to test crazy amounts of platforms. Next thing I'm going to talk about is Language Chef. This is a plugin for Atom. There's a similar plugin for Sublime. There's similar plugins for a bunch of different things. But Atom is what I use, so I like autocompletes. I have a horrible memory. I can never remember what like Windows Task looks like or what Windows Path looks like. So I added those things. We get all the things that we would need. We get, you know, app preference, and it just shows up in this pull-down menu for you, which is super handy. We just have to add them every time a new one comes out, right? So here's what you have to do. You just have to kind of put a bunch of new lines and things and like fill in some fields and that's system to unit. Not particularly hard, but a nice thing to get out there so that when you're using Atom, it knows about all the new resources in Chef. When we bring a whole bunch of new resources into Chef 14, I'll go through and add these. And I'm looking at what we can do to make it work better with custom resources as well, because I spend a lot of time in custom resources. It would be really great if we could get like the properties to autofill and stuff like that. So that is coming soon. All right, so on to cookbooks. Got a whole bunch of different cookbooks that have been edited recently, a whole bunch of major releases. I want to talk about some of the stuff in our major releases. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Chef Client Cookbook. The major breaking change here is this 9.0 release. If you're using Windows, this is a big deal for you. If you're not, then it's not at all. On the Windows side, we took out the Windows Service support. Now we're using scheduled tasks only. The Windows Service support was super problematic. A long-running Ruby process on Windows leaks memory and it crashes the system. It's basically just guaranteed. So people that were using it as a service on Windows because that feels native, were having a really bad time. We got that cleaned up. We've also got a few different improvements that I think are pretty important. Some just kind of improving the general experience across other distros of Linux. So like these two, if you're using the cron recipe now, we used to clean up sysv, but we didn't do it on every platform. So now we do it on every platform. And the same thing with log rotation. We didn't do it on every platform. So now we do it on every platform, right? This is just kind of taking some things that community members had added on for their specific distros and making sure they're more generic. A little bit of improved testing, and then SLES 11, which was a common complaint. We have SLES 11 working fully for people. And then just a whole bunch of bugs, which is always great. The SLES 11 change did require a change to the cron cookbook. This adds support to SLES 11, and that's it was actually a really simple one. SLES 11 just uses a different package for cron, so we had to make sure that we had the correct package. We were using the Vixie cron or something, so whatever SLES 12 uses, which is not what SLES 11 uses. This cookbook also got updated, got some improved testing. We're testing 12 and 13 in Chef, and we're testing Debian 9 now, which is a little bit different. And we're not using compat resource anymore. This is, I think, the last major place we had compat resource. We're trying to kill that off everywhere. Everybody should be at least on Chef 12.7 at this point. It's 18 months old. If you're not on that, it's totally time to upgrade. That's about it on this one. Just a little bit of additional stuff, some cleanup. Then we have the Cedar Cookbook. This is another major breaking change for some people, but not for everybody. One of the big problems with the Cedar Cookbook was it ships with a sudo resource, and everybody wants to jump in and use a sudo resource. They want to say, hey, I've created this user for my service and it needs sudo access, so I'm going to add it right here. And it doesn't work, and they can't figure out why it doesn't work. It just silently fails. And the reason is that resource creates a single entry in the sudo.d directory. Now, not every distro uses the sudo.d directory, and especially when this cookbook was originally written, basically none of them did. So we had to disable it by default. We had this attribute, include sudoers d. It was set to false before. You had to set it to true to be able to use the custom resource, which is a horrible user experience. But we had to do that because of RHEL 5. Well, RHEL 5 is into the not mainstream support anymore. It technically is still supported if you pay Red Hat a whole bunch of money. CentOS 5 is totally not supported, and at this point we're not going to support it. So we're not supporting CentOS 5 in community cookbooks anymore. We're not supporting Ubuntu 12.04, which is the other distro I believe where this didn't work, and then Debian 6, which also didn't have this working. So now we can safely turn on the sudoers d when we're on Linux, and that means for Linux users, this just works. The sudo resource just works, which is awesome. The second change is another super legacy change in here. Going way back before Chef, before ops code even, going back to HJK Solutions, when Adam and company were setting up people's startups, they created the sysadmin group. And they created all the users on your system. They were local users. You didn't have LDAP or anything like that. And those users were all part of the sysadmin group. And the sysadmin group was given sudoers access. And this was default in the attribute for you. And it's kind of a pain to take this out because the attribute is an array, so you actually have to remove it. Most people don't want this. Some people built their orgs around this concept that Chef had, which, sorry. But it's not something we want to do anymore. This is totally a surprise to people, whereas magically this sysadmin group gets sudoers on all their boxes. Maybe they don't notice it, which is also scary. But if they do, like, they're not happy about it. So we took it out. Definitely it's a breaking change. If you use this, if this is something you need in your environment, you need to specify it now. And that's the way it should be. That's the way it should have been from the beginning. And that's what we're doing. So that is that. Then we have the Memcache Cookbook. This one I just merged in and released. This was a long-running PR that solved some of the big problems in this cookbook. Some of those were solved, again, by removing rel 5 support. We got rid of the yum EPL dependency. We got rid of a whole bunch of weird legacy code that was all over the place. And we're going to do a similar thing with Run It. I marked Run It. Support is deprecated. Modern distros have a much better init system than Run It. Just use systemd, use Upstart. They're better. There's really no reason to be using Run It at this point. So with that, we'll lose the Run It dependency, and then this cookbook actually doesn't depend on anything. But what we did get in this version is a whole bunch of fixes to how we do the sysv scripts. That fixes running sysv on non-sysv systems, Fedoras, you know, Amazon or Red Hat 7 or Ubuntu 14.04. That is something that people want to do sometimes. I'm not entirely sure why, but that's something that people dig. So that works now. And Debian 7 support is there as well. That was done by actually just shipping 2 different sysv scripts. This is why I'm very excited to see sysv go away. It's tricky, and we have to have double init scripts because the things are totally different on different distributions. And then the final one I'm going to talk about here, because this is something that you'll be seeing, I hope, in more of our products, or more of our cookbooks. Brought in a whole bunch of cool stuff that systemd can do. And this, again, goes to why I think systemd is actually kind of cool, other than some of the other reasons why it's not. Systemd gives you a whole bunch of process isolation functionality, and this is really great, particularly when you maybe don't trust a service. So if your Memcache server gets compromised, you don't want that process to be able to write all over the file system, to read all over the file system. You want to make sure that it is as isolated as it can be. So this gives us that ability. We're restricting address families. We're putting it in a private temp directory. We're protecting the system. Like this is exactly what we want, right? Like we want to keep this process super isolated. So now out of the box, the Memcache service with Chef will be super isolated and protected. Again, where we can do that in other places, we're definitely going to bring some of these things in. At the very least, the private temp one is super simple. That makes sure that you're not reading some other thing that somebody writes into their temp directory. Everyone should definitely pull this in sooner rather than later. It's a nice release. It fixes up a lot of stuff. Next one is Perl. This is another big change for Windows users. If you're not a Windows user, it's less important for you. This cookbook had a recipe previously specifically for Windows. It was a big complex recipe. It pulled down a zip file, it decompressed it, which meant that you had to have the ability to do that. And it was installing the Strawberry Perl port of Perl to Windows, which some people use, right? There's people who run Perl on Windows. We're using Chocolatey now. We have a Chocolatey resource built into Chef. Much simpler to do it with this. If you really still want to use the old way, you can pin back to the old cookbook. But going forward, I think in a lot of places where it makes sense, some of these, particularly Unix things getting ported into Windows, we're going to start using Chocolatey, just because it gives a really good user experience for people in community cookbooks. It also fixed the Amazon support, and the cpan module resources actually works on Windows now, which is a big one. Before you could install Perl, but you couldn't install modules using the resource. Now it all works on Windows, which required a little bit of tweaking to like where the paths for the binaries and all that stuff were. And then this one, it was kind of funny, as I was trying to figure out why the cpan-m stuff didn't work on Fedora 27, which it still doesn't. And in doing that, I realized that we were pulling down from GitHub, we were pulling that whole giant Perl script down. And we were pulling down a version that was 4 years old. So there's been a ton of bug fixes there since then, tons of enhancements, works way better. Now we pull down the new one. So that'll work better for a lot of people. We're also doing much better version comparisons. We're handling versions that were not in a Perl-ish version format. So our regex has improved, basically, and we have some testing in that to make sure that it stays that way. So that is Perl. And then the final one I'm going to talk about is Runit. This is the old Runit code, and I'm going to show some really fun stuff that this code did. And I think it was mostly because we were inclined to merge things sometimes without fully understanding what we were doing. So there's a few really odd things in here. I'll start by just kind of explaining a little bit what Runit has to do. So Runit is an init system that has to get started by your init system. It's not the first PID on the system. You're not running your system under Runit. You're running it under sysv or under systemd or upstart or whatever. So upstart or systemd or sysv, they have to start up Runit, and then Runit has to realize all the things it should be starting, and Runit has to start those. And when they fail, Runit has to make sure they start back up, right? Normal things that an init system does. So there's a Runit service, and you'd think that maybe that's it, but we're not starting it, so that probably isn't it. This is it, in fact, it, but we're also not starting it, so that's not it. This is also it, if you're on rel 7, but we're only starting this on rel 7. So really what it came down to is we had like these continued bugs that people would submit where they're like, my services don't start at boot. My services don't start. Like, Runit's not working. And what it really was this Runit service, which has different names depending on which platform you're on, wasn't actually being started. Super, super basic thing. We were installing it, but we were never starting it. We had some triggers here to like do the starts, but not on every platform. Like, you know, start it when you're on Gentoo. That's cool. That's just what I want. So I went through this, and I, through many releases, unfortunately, fixed some of it. We've done a few in the last few days, to get some of these things right. But what we have now is a very crazy if statement that makes it work, right? So we have platform and version-specific service names. It's different. It's different depending on what version of Ubuntu you're on, or whether you're on Debian. When you're on RHEL, it's different. When you're on Amazon, it's different. Like, it's different, right? There's a whole bunch of 4 different combinations here. 3 different combinations of what you can have, depending on which platform and version you're on. So we started on all those places. And when you are on rel 6, we also do the right thing, and we start it under upstart, which is a really funky thing. Rel 6 is actually upstart. Most people don't realize that. In fact, Chef doesn't even realize it, which is why we have to do this. Yeah. So, oh, and Debian 7 has no init script, which is really weird. It works, but not with an init script. So this works, and the reason I know it works is because, not because of that, not because of that error, that's a transient error, is that we're actually testing this thing all the way now. We're testing it on all the platforms and versions that we say we support, and we're testing it on Chef 12 and Chef 13, which showed us a few different problems that we had. Because I'm testing, obviously, in Chef 13, but a lot of people are still using Chef 12. So this is fully tested for this scenario. I can't test the service scenario in Travis because of Runit and Docker and other weird things that happen there. But I can test at least that the package installs and that the Runit service starts and that all works. And like I said, getting this in and putting all the testing in was why I did 3 releases yesterday, and it's why it actually works now. So I think if you're using Runit, like, you definitely want to make sure that somebody doesn't just like accidentally disable that service on your box. You should definitely go check out the new version, because I think it'll be a lot more reliable. Also, if you're using Runit, you should probably consider not using Runit. But that is everything I have to demo now. I'm sure I missed a few things, and I talked super fast, and I talked for a long time. but I did a lot of stuff in 2 months. So enjoy.